Have you ever wondered why NASA simply erases some of its own astronauts from history? What if I told you that there are missions that no one has ever heard of because maybe you were never supposed to know? It may seem like a conspiracy theory, but the more you delve into this universe, the more you realize that there are gaps that cannot be explained with institutional silence alone. Secret missions, names that disappeared from records, astronauts that officially never existed. The question is, what did they see or what happened to them that made them need to be erased? Imagine dedicating your entire life to space exploration, training in extreme regimes, being chosen to represent humanity, and suddenly disappearing from the map. No mention, no tribute, no name carved on plaques of recognition. Nothing. Just oblivion. The truth is that there is evidence, leaked documents, and even testimonies from former employees that suggest something much darker. Behind the scenes of the most powerful space agency in the world. Have you ever heard of Ivan Istochnikov? Officially, it never existed. But there is one photograph, a single image that can call this story into question. It's no wonder that many believe that NASA participates in secret space programs, covering up not just failures, but entire disappearances, as if certain astronauts had crossed a line they should never have crossed. Stay with me until the end, because what you discover now may surprise you and maybe even change the way you see everything you know about the space race. There is something very wrong when an agency that values transparency refuses to release unedited images, hides recordings of communications on specific missions, and worse, avoids answering direct questions about disappearances. What really happened to those who were sent into space and ... never came back? And this is just the beginning. Because the next piece of this story takes us to an even darker point. A revelation that many believe to be the biggest taboo in space exploration. And when we start to put the pieces together, crossed out names, censored audio, ghost missions, we can't help but wonder what is being hidden from us and why. Maybe you, like many people who follow this type of content, have already felt that strange feeling that not everything they tell us about space is the complete truth. And if this topic makes sense to you, leave here in the comments what has touched you most so far. Have you ever heard about cases like this? Ever felt like something was off in official NASA stories? Your opinion here is not only welcome, it is essential. Because it is from this exchange that we build a community that questions, investigates, and is not satisfied with ready-made versions. Every like on this video shows that this type of topic needs to continue to be explored. And when you subscribe to the channel, you're saying, yes, I want more content like this. I want to keep listening to what isn't being said. The truth is that, on this type of journey, no one investigates alone. Your participation here is what makes this channel grow and reach more people who also feel that there is something wrong with the stories they have always told us. So, if this resonates with you, don't keep it to yourself. Like, comment, share. Because maybe, just maybe, someone by your side is waiting for a spark of truth. And speaking of truth, what comes now may make this theory seem like just the surface of something much deeper. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because, as far away as it may seem, something from a movie, science fiction, or hidden pages on the internet, the signs are right before our eyes. We're not just talking about ancient events or stories buried in the Cold War archives. We are talking about recent leaks, documents that have been declassified in recent decades, and testimonies from people who were there. Inside the structure, living behind the scenes of the largest space program on the planet. Think about it. With why would an agency like NASA, which has always positioned itself as a symbol of scientific transparency and human progress, maintain secret programs, missions never revealed, and incomplete records of astronauts? In a world where information is instantaneous, why are there Still such dense areas of silence and pages ripped out of history. In recent years, a series of files previously considered highly confidential have been released under public pressure, especially in the United States through laws such as FOIA Freedom of Information Act. And do you know what is impressive? It's not what is written in these documents, ... It's what it is not. Gaps, entire lines deleted. Incompatible dates, missions that begin but never end in official records. Astronauts who appear in training but are never mentioned again. And when someone tries to pull that thread, silence speaks louder. Independent theorists and researchers have been raising questions for years. It's not just about space technology, but about decisions. Decisions made by an informed elite determined to control what reaches the collective consciousness of humanity. There is a hidden, or rather fragmented truth that goes far beyond rockets and satellites. It's about mindset, of transformation. How the very narrative of our evolution as a civilization may be being shaped and filtered by interests much greater than we imagine. And that is precisely what makes this topic so urgent. We are facing a new era where more and more people are questioning, searching, investigating. Blind trust in official versions is dissolving. And at the heart of this change, there are stories like the one we are exploring here. Stories that shake up everything we believe about security, technological advancement, and even our destiny as a species. And don't think that these disappearances are limited to Russian astronauts in times of the Cold War. There are reports of unrecognized missions from the United States during the 1980s, linked to parallel projects between NASA and military agencies. Some experts claim that these officially unmanned flights were actually very well crewed. But who were these crew members, and why don't we ever hear about them? Many of these signs point to something that goes beyond the fear of public failures or embarrassing accidents. The feeling is that certain events were simply canceled from reality because they would reveal truths for which, perhaps, we were not yet prepared. Truths with the potential to shake belief systems, political stability, and even the way we view our position in the universe. The question is, to what extent is it acceptable to hide information in the name of security? And what defines this security? Whose safety? When we look at the reports of disengaged scientists, retired astronauts who changed their speech years later, and recordings that leak through unofficial channels, we begin to notice a pattern that can no longer be ignored. Pattern that speaks of control and manipulation. And it's not about finding blame or pointing the finger at institutions. What is at stake here is something much deeper. It is the right to know, to understand what really happened and what is still happening above our heads, away from the press spotlight, away from the carefully edited live broadcasts, away from the difficult questions at press conferences. That's why talking about missing astronauts isn't just about revisiting dusty archives or raising crazy theories. It is a journey through what was suspended in time, kept between codes, secrecy, and pacts of silence. A journey that, when carefully observed, reveals much more than crossed-out names or erased missions. It reveals a pattern of decision-making, a mode of operation that may be shaping our future without us even realizing it. Comment there. That makes sense to me. I really want to know how this part of the story makes you feel, because the next piece of this puzzle reveals even more about the impact of these hidden choices. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because when we talk about space disappearances, we're not just dealing with technical failures or unexpected accidents. We are talking about the kind of silence that is not born by chance. A calculated silence, official, and, perhaps, irreversible. Between the 60s and 90s, the height of the space race and also the darkest scenes of global geopolitics, several missions simply disappeared from the records. Incomplete data, dropped transmissions, sudden protocol changes. And between these, gaps, a name appears like an unsettling echo. Ivan Istochnikov. Ivan's case is one of the most disturbing when we talk about astronauts who were supposedly deleted. Officially, it never existed. But then, how can we explain the photo of him next to the Soyuz 2 spacecraft, holding his onboard dog, Kloka? How to explain the documents found years later in uncatalogued Russian archives, mentioning a cosmonaut by that name who embarked on a classified mission and never returned? And more curious, how to explain that after the disappearance? The official version was that Soyuz 2 had been launched without crew. This type of contradiction does not go unnoticed when observed carefully. There are records, however faded, that show their presence in training, onboard lists, and even in internal communications from the former USSR. But what is most intriguing is the way his name was wiped from history with almost surgical precision. It's as if someone had rewritten the facts and left just one or two pieces in the wrong place, pieces that now give away that something much bigger was happening. And this opens up an even more disturbing question. What really happened to Ivan Istochnikov? There are theories that say he was captured by external, perhaps even non-human forces. Others suggest that he had access to something, a discovery, an image, a contact that simply couldn't be leaked. From then on, he would have been removed, relocated, silenced. There are also those who say that Ivan never died, but lives under another identity, monitored by international agencies as part of an undeclared pact between world powers. This possibility, however absurd it may sound at first glance, gains strength when we place this case alongside others that are equally mysterious. Missions like Apollo 20, which officially never existed, but from which videos, reports, and even an alleged former U.S. military pilot who claimed to have participated in it emerged, reporting the discovery of an abandoned alien ship on the far side of the moon. It may be crazy, but what if it's true? When we talk about the behind the scenes of space exploration, we need to remember that we are dealing with something much bigger than just science and technology. We are talking about decisions that shape the way we see the universe, decisions that, when they involve geopolitical risk, social impact, and even transformations in the human paradigm, can be carefully hidden for decades. Not to protect us, necessarily, but to preserve power structures that would not be sustained in the face of certain truths. Ivan's case shows us that there is a hidden journey behind space missions. A journey that mixes forbidden knowledge, military interests, and silent pacts between nations. When someone disappears like this, the most worrying thing is not the disappearance itself. It is the effort to erase any trace of your existence, because it shows that the problem isn't the loss. It's what that person saw, heard, or maybe brought back. And this is the line that separates what we are told from what could have really happened. On this journey, the hidden truth is not in the headlines or press releases. It is in the ignored details, in the whispered contradictions, in the names crossed out on the papers, and in figures like Ivan Istochnikov, who perhaps represent a watershed, one of those moments that the system chooses to hide rather than explain. And then the question changes. Was Ivan the only one? Or are there others, erased from history in the same way, waiting to be rediscovered? If there is one documented case, however distorted it may be, how many others have been buried even deeper? How many classified files hide unauthorized missions, and how many of them had endings that we were never told about? This is where the mystery begins to take a more complex form, because maybe it's not just about disappearances, Maybe it's about what these astronauts witnessed. And if that's true, if there's a layer of spatial reality that hasn't yet been revealed to us, then we're just scratching the surface of something much bigger. Something that may have started decades ago, but that still resonates in the present. Write it in the comments. I'm on this journey too. Because if you've come this far, It's because you're ready to go further. And now we're going to go through one of the most impactful parts of this story. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because when we start to connect the dots, we realize that these are not just operational failures or isolated accidents. There is a fine, it's almost invisible line between what is considered a technical error and what may actually be part of a silence protocol. And this line appears more often than we would like to imagine. There are those who say that NASA, along with other space agencies, operates under an undeclared code when something happens unexpectedly, be it a contact, an anomaly, or a loss. The most important thing is not to understand or disclose it, ... It is to contain it. Control the narrative. Protect the system. One of the most persistent theories is the cover-up of fatal accidents. Officially, NASA has a relatively clean history of manned missions. But there are independent reports and investigations that suggest that not all astronauts returned, and the most disturbing thing, some were not even officially recognized. In 1986, for example, with the Challenger disaster, 7 lives were officially lost. But there are unconfirmed records that point to additional names in advanced training that simply disappeared from the lists after the tragedy. Coincidence? Registration failure? Or is it part of something much deeper? Another theory raises the hypothesis of unauthorized missions, or rather, parallel missions, those that are not part of the official schedule released to the public. Secret programs conducted with military support where astronauts were sent for extreme tests or operations that should never be known. There is even an expression whispered behind the scenes of space history: black missions. These are classified operations where not even civilian agencies have complete access to the data. And in cases like this, if something goes wrong, there's no rescue, there's no funeral, there's no headline. There is silence, and perhaps the most controversial, but also the one that most captures the imagination, is the contact theory. Not contact with satellites, meteorites, or out-of-control radiation, but with something intelligent, something that responded. Several former employees and retired technicians have already come forward, stating that there are records of interference. During transmissions, unidentified signals intercepted on orbiting missions, and unusual behaviors reported by astronauts shortly before the shutdown of communications. There are even leaked transcripts of dialogues where astronauts report presences near the station or capsule, and soon after, the channel is cut. Imagine the impact of something like this on the global mentality. If, on a seemingly ordinary mission, an astronaut encounters an intelligent life form or non-human technology, what would that do here on Earth? What kind of transformation would this information cause in the social structure, in politics, in religion, in the economy? It's not difficult to understand why, if something like this actually occurred. The decisions made would be one of absolute suppression. Protect the truth, they say. But whose truth? And this is the most delicate part of this journey. When we talk about hidden truth, we are not saying that all is a lie. We are saying that part of reality, it is systematically hidden, filtered. And this part may contain precisely the missing pieces to understand the complete picture. Decisions involving this type of secret are not simple. They involve risks, fears, and often pacts between nations that prefer to keep certain matters out of the light. But history shows that secrets never stay buried forever. They leak, flow through the cracks in the structure, reveal themselves. In the speeches of those who no longer have anything to lose, or in the clues that resist time. It is curious how, throughout history, inexplicable events are almost always treated with the same tools: discredit, ridicule, and oblivion. And that's how many of these reports get lost. But when someone stops to listen, to connect the scenes, the cuts, and the silences, the truth begins to emerge. And even though it comes wrapped in doubts and theories, it carries a force that is uncomfortable. What an awakening! What transforms so? If we consider that there are astronauts who have seen more than they should have, who have engaged in missions beyond public knowledge, or who have perhaps come into contact with a form of intelligence that we don't understand, everything changes. The way we see space is the way we understand our role in the universe, and mainly the way we trust the official versions of what is counted as science. In this scenario, disappearances are no longer just tragedies. They become clues, fragments of a more complex reality. And that's why investigating, questioning, and keeping these stories alive is so important, because even without all the answers, it is in this process that the truth begins to reveal itself. Comment there. That makes sense to me. Because now we are going to enter an even more delicate point in this plot, where what is at stake may be much greater than we imagine. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because a theory, however intriguing it may be, only begins to gain real weight when the signs appear, the evidence that escapes control, the fragments that resist censorship, the records that leak and spread in silence. And what is most impressive is the amount of evidence that was never shown on official channels. We're not talking about videos made on obscure forums or rumors out there. We are talking about material that circulates among serious scholars, forensic analysts, and even former agency employees who decided at some point in their lives to no longer comply with silence. One of the most emblematic cases involves a transmission intercepted in 1979 by a Russian radio amateur named Yuri. He, like many others passionate about radio and technology, used to pick up lost signals, fragments of space communications that escaped official frequencies. And one night, he recorded a short but disturbing segment from Earth orbit. The voice was muffled. He spoke in English with an American accent. What was heard was, "We are not alone. There's something outside the module, ... Minutes later, static. The channel went down. There was never official confirmation of which mission could have originated that signal. And the strangest thing, no missions were officially registered on that date. This audio, even though it was short, generated dozens of technical analyses. Space acoustics experts say the sound pattern and background noise match the type of transmission used on NASA missions at that time. Others point out that the shape of the sound wave resembles that used by manned capsules in low orbit. It's not absolute proof, but it's a trace. An uncomfortable fragment that does not fit into any common explanation. Another case that deserves attention involves images captured during the Apollo 15 mission. In 2011, a former outsourced employee from NASA's photographic analysis sector anonymously released a sequence of frames that had supposedly been cut from the public collection. In this sequence, it is possible to see a metallic structure in the background, with angles and symmetries that do not resemble natural formations. Even stranger is that this fund completely disappears in the official records published on the agency's website. The justification given at the time was optical interference and internal reflection in the lens. But when image editing, experts analyzed the material, the result was clear. The image had been digitally altered. Someone deleted something from there. It's not an exaggeration. It's technical data. And how can we ignore the reports from the astronauts themselves? Many of them, years after retiring, let out phrases, comments, and even outbursts. Buzz Aldrin, for example, already stated in an interview with Dutch TV that there is a structure on the Phobos satellite, and we didn't put it there. Edgar Mitchell, from Apollo 14, spent the last years of his life publicly stating that the United States government knew about the existence of intelligent life forms and was hiding this from the population. Of course, these are statements that many tried to discredit. They attributed to age, tiredness, sensationalism. But why would someone who has dedicated his life to science and precision put his own reputation at risk for no real reason? This evidence forms a disconnected mosaic at first glance, but it only takes a little attention and a change in mindset to realize that there is a pattern. Whenever something strange appears, a recording, an unusual image, an unexpected statement, the official response is vague, technical, and invariably followed by silence. This has become predictable behavior. And when the pattern repeats itself many times, it stops being a coincidence. It becomes deliberate behavior. Strategy now. Think with me. If there are documents that were removed from public archives, there are audios that are not recognized, altered images debunked, reports, who exactly is deciding what humanity can or cannot know? Who sits at these tables, reviews this data, and chooses what will be counted and what will be buried forever? This is a disturbing question because it reveals that perhaps we are not as free to know the truth as we think. It is at this point that the hidden truth begins to show its most dangerous contours. Because it's not just about protecting technical information or keeping technological advances secret. It's about protecting narratives, of shaping what we believe about the universe and about ourselves. And this has a direct impact on the decisions we make as a civilization, the priorities we establish, the limits we accept without question. The evidence exists. They are not piled up in a room with red lights and security codes like in the movies, but they are scattered, fragmented, waiting to be connected. They are in forgotten radio broadcasts, in ignored interviews, in altered photos, and in phrases spoken hesitantly by those who saw more than they should have. They are not evidence to condemn or accuse, but to reflect on, to make room, to transform. The way we look at what is above us and at what is being decided far away from the eyes of the majority. Write it in the comments. With this, my mind opened. Because what you will discover from now on reveals even more about the behind the scenes of this story, and you may never see space in the same way again. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject. Because every well-constructed story has two sides, and that's exactly what makes this topic even more complex. On the one hand, we have leaks, testimonies, images, audio, and silence that suggests something much bigger behind space missions. On the other, the official position. NASA denies everything. And he doesn't just deny it, he classifies it as exaggeration, misinformation, fiction fed by fertile minds. And here comes a question that cannot be ignored. If there really is nothing to hide, why has so much data remained classified for more than 50 years? The technical explanation is always the same: national security. A vague but efficient expression. It serves to keep documents locked, conversations protected by eternal secrecy and decisions out of public view. The official narrative says that the reported accidents were investigated. The images were altered due to quality issues or equipment exposure. And the audio was distorted due to natural interference. It seems coherent, up to a point. But when we look at the pattern, the systematic repetition of generic answers to specific questions, something doesn't add up. There is a stark difference between denying information and never allowing it to even be discussed. And that's what often happens. When a journalist or researcher tries to raise more sensitive issues, they are quickly labeled a conspiracist, discredited, or ignored by the mainstream media. And here is where the true impact of this narrative lies: the manipulation of doubt. What happens when the system itself builds a field of invisibility around certain information? The public, over time, becomes accustomed to trusting only the official version, not out of conviction, but out of tiredness. The idea of questioning begins to seem like a futile or even dangerous effort. And this type of mentality, this habit of accepting ready-made answers, is exactly what sustains the great secrets of history. Science, at its core, should be based on continuous questioning. No theory should be untouchable. No event should be shielded from investigation. But when it comes to some episodes of the space race, especially those involving disappearances, contacts, or anomalies, what we see is not science, it's narrative. Control. It's a kind of selective editing of reality, where only certain versions survive time. For example, when asked about altered images, NASA representatives claim digital compression, equipment failures, or human errors. When confronted with intercepted audios, they say they are fakes or misunderstandings caused by atmospheric phenomena. And when it comes to names erased from official records, the answer is usually that these individuals were never part of the program, even though there are photographs, documented training, and even testimonies from colleagues confirming their existence. And perhaps the most delicate part of all this is not the denial itself, but the way it is accepted. There is a tacit consensus that some questions should not be asked, as if there is an invisible line between what is healthy curiosity and what is dangerous distrust. And this leads us to reflect, to what extent is our perception of the universe shaped by what we are allowed to know? It's not a direct accusation. We are not saying that every omitted piece of information is proof of conspiracy. But when the volume of denied information begins to exceed the volume of convincing explanations, a void appears, a space between what they tell us and what really happened. And it is in this void that the mystery lives. And the mystery, when sustained by decades of silence, becomes a kind of shadow that accompanies an entire generation. That's why it's so important to keep these issues alive. Because the more we remain silent in the face of contradictions, the more the official versions become absolute truths. And absolute truths, when they cannot be discussed, cease to be science and become dogmas. And dogmas do not promote advancement. They paralyze. They shape mentalities, direct decisions, and keep us away from what really matters: the search for truth, even if it bothers us. So every time you hear that none of this is real, or that there is not enough evidence, stop and think, why so much resistance to showing the complete data? Why do entire files remain inaccessible for so long? And why do the few who try to break this cycle end up being silenced, discredited, or forgotten? It's not about proving everything is a scam. It's about keeping your thoughts free. It's about remembering that each person has the right to question, investigate, and build their own understanding of the world. And that, sometimes, the simple act of asking is, in itself, a form of transformation. Comment there that makes sense to me. Because now the journey takes us to a moment where the truth is not only hidden, it is camouflaged within what most call reality. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject. Because up until now, everything seems to revolve around silences, disappearances, and contradictions. But what if I told you there was an even more disturbing possibility? Something that completely transforms the way we view space disappearances. A revelation that doesn't just speak of loss, but of return. And not just any return, a reappearance shrouded in secrecy. A false identity and a dossier that no one dared to officially disclose. In 2017, a document leaked by an anonymous source supposedly linked to an international protection program revealed information previously considered impossible. It contained a name that had already been considered non-existent decades before. A name that belonged to an astronaut involved in a mission not recognized by NASA, which was reportedly canceled without explanation in the 1980s. The curious thing, that name was linked to a diplomatic passport issued in the 2000s for an entirely different identity. Linked to a joint operation between intelligence and aerospace protection agencies. What makes this even more unsettling is the fact that the face linked to this new name is eerily similar to old photos, not released to the public, of the supposed missing astronaut. Side-by-side leaked images show the same features, the same facial structure, even a discrete scar in the same place. Coincidence or evidence that someone returned and needed to be reinvented? This dossier also included medical records, with dates incompatible with the declared birth of the new identity. Exams with biometric data that, in theory, should not exist unless that person had a previous life, a life that could not be revealed. Most disturbing, however, was in a handwritten note: incomplete reintegration, exposure to anomalous. Phenomenon, a vague phrase, but one that raises an alarm in anyone who has delved behind the scenes of space exploration. This revelation brings a much greater weight to this entire journey. Because it stops being just about covering up, it becomes about transformation. What could have happened to this astronaut? What type of event or contact could justify not only disappearance, but forced reinsertion into another reality, under another identity? This is not fiction. This is a twist that appears in real documents with real names. Signatures and records that simply do not match the versions that have been presented to us so far and here. Inevitably, the deeper question arises: what exactly are they trying to protect? Could it be the image of the agency, institutional stability? Or is there something more, something that transcends politics, geopolitics, and national security? Something that may have put this astronaut in contact with information, intelligence, or realities that the majority of humanity is not yet prepared to know. There are unconfirmed reports that this individual, now under a protected identity, lives in seclusion, being monitored, and that he suffered cognitive and behavioral changes upon his return. A close source reported that he does not answer questions about space, avoids any mention of NASA, and has episodes of prolonged silence when listening to low-frequency radio sounds. Details like this, even without official confirmation, do not appear out of nowhere. And the pattern repeats itself. Whenever a truth begins to form, there is a movement to discredit, deconstruct, or simply erase it. What this shows us is that the backstories of these stories are much denser than one might imagine. We are not just talking about technology or human failures. We are talking about decisions. Decisions that involve lives, identities, and perhaps knowledge that goes beyond the borders of what we know as science. Decisions made by small, discrete groups with access to the kind of truth that the world is not yet ready to face. What if this reappearance was not an isolated case? What if there are others living under code names, far from everything and everyone, keeping memories that cannot be shared? The mere possibility that an astronaut has returned and been silenced, forcibly reinstated into a new life, reveals that we are dealing with something beyond any ordinary conspiracy. We are facing a control mechanism that operates at the limits of reality and public perception. This turn changes everything, because it confirms that not only are there well-kept secrets, but there are lives shaped to keep those secrets alive, silent and out of the collective consciousness. And that forces us to reevaluate everything. What is actually counted as truth, and what is carefully constructed to keep us within a comfortable zone where questions like that are considered crazy? Right there, I'm on this journey too. Because now, more than ever, the next piece of this puzzle could be the key to understanding the real impact behind these disappearances and what they really mean for humanity. Now, I want to go even deeper into this subject, because at some point on this journey, the investigation stops being just about facts and begins to touch on something more intimate: the way we were shaped to see the world, the way in which, from a young age, we learn that certain topics should not be questioned, that some truths are absolute, that what they show us is all that exists. And, without realizing it, we start to live in a carefully constructed narrative, where space is only a setting for heroism, science and progress, but never a stage for conflicts, lies, or omissions. What if the story of space conquest, the one we grew up admiring, with images of flags planted on the moon and smiles of astronauts floating in zero gravity, is in fact just a convenient fraction of reality? A clean, edited version designed to inspire, yes, but also to hide. And if behind these incredible feats are stories that never reached us, why couldn't they? Think about how many times you've heard the same versions, the same names, the same Deeds, the same historical milestones told and retold in textbooks, films, and documentaries. And now compare that to what you've seen so far. Deleted images, silenced voices, leaked documents, names disappearing from official records. The truth, when it begins to emerge, does not appear as a scream, she whispers. It appears in details that don't make sense, in the gaps that no one explains, in questions that are answered with jokes, deflections, or silence. And if you stop for a moment and face it head-on, you'll realize the emotional weight it all carries. Because it's not just about missing astronauts or secret missions. It is about our own confidence. How much we believe or want to believe that we are part of a civilization that plays fair with its own history. The impact of realizing that this may not be true is not small. He messes with us, with our relationship with knowledge, with science, with authority. How many decisions in your life were guided by truths that may now need to be revised? It is not easy to face this transformation, but it is necessary. Because as long as we continue to accept fixed narratives, we will continue to be passive spectators of a story that could and should belong entirely to us. When we talk about manipulation since childhood, we're not saying that we were maliciously deceived, but rather that we were conditioned not to question it, accepting what comes ready, what shines on the surface without digging deeper. Except some start digging. And when that happens, there's no going back. Because seeing the gear inside changes everything. Curiosity becomes awareness. Doubt becomes impulse. And suddenly, what seemed like just a theory begins to appear as a real trail, full of fragments of a hidden truth that, for some reason, many still struggle to keep buried. This journey affects our sense of belonging. Because if there are stories that have been erased, how many others are still being written right now, without us having access? And what does this say about our role as humanity? Are we still just passengers observing the behind the scenes of the universe from afar? Or is it past time for us to take on the role of protagonists, of those who demand answers, raise questions, and do not remain silent in the face of inconsistencies? This type of reflection is not just theoretical. She is emotional. She touches on open wounds, disappointment, frustration, but also hope. Because if there is hidden truth, then there is still something worth fighting for. The right to know, the right to understand. To question not out of rebellion, but out of dignity. And if everything you've seen so far has made you feel this way, then you're no longer in the same place as when you started this video. You have crossed a layer of reality that few dare to explore, and that changes everything. Comment there. That makes sense to me, because now the next revelation doesn't just answer. It exposes something that could completely upend our understanding of what's really being done. Said and hidden up there. If you've made it this far, it's because something in this content really touched you. Maybe it was a doubt that was always there, or maybe a feeling that the pieces never fit right. But the fact is that this journey that we built together wasn't just about astronauts or secret documents. It was about looking more carefully, thinking more deeply, and allowing ourselves to question what always seemed immutable. If this type of content made sense to you, if it brought some kind of clarity or even more questions, which is also great, subscribe to the channel here. Not because you need to, but because this is a space made for those who don't accept easy answers. And believe me, there is still a lot that you deserve to discover. Enjoy and leave the sentence here in the comments, "I'm with you until the end," just so I know who really walked with me to this point. Because it creates a real connection. We are together in this process of discovering, investigating, expanding perception, and of course, if this video provoked any reflection in you, leave a like. It helps keep this type of content alive, visible, and moving. That makes a real difference. There's a video here that complements everything we talked about today. Click and stay with me there. because the next piece of this puzzle is already waiting for you.